So thank you so much, Natalie, Hema, and Ajit for joining this panel discussion. Today's value creation is clearly anchored in technology. When we look at the top global firms, 7 out of 10 are technology or science-based companies. And where does this come from? It definitely comes from excellence and breakthroughs in science, but it also comes from consistent investment throughout the life cycle. It comes from governments playing an active role through the procurement process. It comes through framework conditions. Now, if we wanted to have a dose of optimism about Europe, which I realize has not been with us since the very morning today, I think one good way to look is the list of 25 deep tech startups at the heart of Europe's technological sovereignty that Sifted published a couple of weeks ago. And they cover quite an extensive ground, from startups active in the infrastructure field, so batteries for sure, but also green steel. They cover the AI startups, the robotics one, and quantum computing plus clean tech. So that's where we should draw some inspiration for the glass half full mindset. But I want to start, Natalie, with a short discussion about health and what needs to happen in health. So health was defined as one of the 4 key areas by the Spanish presidency in the recent Resilient EU 2030 report. The other 3 were digital tech, energy, and food. And clearly, in health, we have seen, and we are seeing, lots of very promising breakthroughs and innovations. The ones that are worth highlighting right now are relating to cell and gene therapies. I mean, they offer the promise of cure to the patients of unprecedented nature. And you have yourself called for a long-term industrial strategy to be defined in Europe that would be holistic, that would cover the pharmaceutical and the healthcare systems and ecosystems, and that would take us all the way to how innovation gets to help the individual patient. So what, in your view, in a nutshell, because I imagine a strategy like that would be quite a sizable policy proposition, so what would that strategy consist of?
Thanks, Pavel, and thanks for the opportunity, because when you mentioned those companies, none of those were health, right? Pharma, biotech. And we all noticed 2 years ago that without health we have absolutely nothing. We're locked at home with nothing, at the cusp of losing our economy and everything else. And I think that is a realization that many parts of the world have had, and yet there's been no action. And I love the title of today's day, which is Building Europe's Future. I like the idea of long-term strategy, and the reason for asking for an industrial strategy for health is because the health ecosystem has evolved incredibly. The technology, what you're talking about, cell and gene therapy, biotech, is completely different from chronic pills that you take over the lifetime, hoping to not get worse. This is about finding solutions, maybe even avoiding diseases. But you can't have that kind of revolution in products if you don't have a revolution the way the products are taken up in countries. And today, healthcare budgets are divided. You have the pharmaceutical budget, the hospital budget, etc. They're not prepared to manage that kind of revolution. There's been no revolution in uptake, which makes it impossible then to guarantee that future, and also from an investment perspective makes Europe look old and unattractive. And you were talking about front runners in the previous panel. It's the same for pharma. The US and China have become front runners, which is terrifying, because 50 years ago we were the front runners. We were the pharmacy of the world. And we can't afford, if we want this strategic autonomy, the resilience, the unity, the safety, peace, we can't afford to be dependent on other parts of the world who could be friends or not, depending on how political developments are going right now, to hand us out the medicines we need to live longer and better lives. So I think there's really that need for a long-term strategic view that goes all the way from science, all the way to the patient, and every step of the way, what are the best possible conditions we can set up in Europe to make us attractive, to make us move back to the front, where we are now lagging scarily towards the back.
I want to ask you a question which is anchored in the area of brain health, which I know a bit better. And there is also enormous promise in a number of fields. Last month, the Dutch government hosted a high-level conference called Defeating Dementia, and Prime Minister Rutte was there. And I repeat, defeating dementia, so not living with dementia, which is the state of the art today. It's actually defeating dementia. And you hear the same type of approach in multiple sclerosis, in a growing number of disorders. But my question will be about the health system side of that equation, because yes, there are happily breakthroughs, but how do we make sure that this is going to be affordable on the health system side of the equation?
And I think that goes also in hand with being part of that discovery. And of course, if in Europe we have lost about a quarter of the global investment in R&D in pharma in the last 20 years. So we are less likely to have that clinical trials, those testing of those products here, which means the clinicians are less likely to be used to them and contributing to that discussion, which means the hospitals and the patients and the whole systems, healthcare systems that you were alluding to, will not have adapted. So when and if those medicines come, it becomes very difficult to see how you would easily pass them on to patients in Europe. So it's a discussion that goes over the whole ecosystem, going back to what I was saying before about making us relevant in terms of not only being great at publishing, because we publish 50,000 more articles on advanced therapies in the US and 20,000 more than China, but publishing articles doesn't mean that the research happens here. And if the research doesn't happen here, neither do the healthcare system updates and the capacity of our clinicians to be relevant happen. And this is a race. When I see we're talking about races, this is really a race we can't afford to fall back on, because products take 10 to 15 years to be developed. So when you lose a race like that, you are 10 to 15 years late, which is very, very late when you talk about the kind of challenges that we're facing today.
Yes, and speaking of that race, you have actually at FPA come up with an estimated figure of what is at risk for Europe. And what you said is at risk is losing 1/3 of the global share of R&D budget, and that share in Europe is declining anyway. So and this was in the context of the pharma legislation that has been proposed, so should these rules be applied, you are saying that there is another big blow waiting. So can you tell us a little bit more how did you get at these numbers, which countries would be most affected, what is the most likely scenario?
I think there's an opportunity, right? Every time you revise legislation, there's a great opportunity to catch up. So this is the first time in 20 years. The science has incredibly developed in the last 20 years. We're revising legislation, great. We can make ourselves attractive again. And, parts of the world like the US and China will be as attractive as us and not more. And then you see the text, the draft text, and you think, oh, let's do a competitiveness check on that, since that was a great idea in this building, in fact. And when we looked at the impact of some of the proposals, in fact, as you said, it looks like a loss of 2 billion euros a year of research in Europe, which means now we've lost 25% of investments, then we're going to move to losing another third, so we'll really be last of the last. And some of the countries where you have the biggest investments, like France, Italy, Germany, Belgium, where not only the investments, but like I said, the whole ecosystem depends on that, will have research centers and hospitals really losing out. And at the end of the day, patients. And the idea of losing 50 products out of the 225 that could be developed in the next 15 years, that's scary for me. I mean, those are things where we do not deserve to be in that place, and we do not want to be in that place if we look to building the future of Europe. So these are numbers that we looked at because competitiveness is important, because the global competitiveness on this after COVID is even fiercer. Everybody knows the importance of health. And we had that great opportunity with the revision. It won't solve everything, but to make sure that the ecosystem is stronger, is more attractive, and that we also get the access side right, which I think it's great to have science, but if it doesn't read the patients, then it's never been a product, it's never been an innovation.
My final question on health before going to Hema and Ajit on AI, and then returning to health in the questions, would be in the context of economic security, because when I quoted this Spanish presidency report, Resilient EU, no, their main worry was economic security. And in health, it obviously matters tremendously with respect to the dependencies which we have already, but also potential new dependencies which we could develop if we don't act early. And what I have in mind in particular is the advanced therapy medicine products. So these new emerging therapies where a lot has to change, including the system of assessment, valuation, and funding. So can you give us the gist of how extensive that adjustment needs to be?
Well, today we have half the clinical trials, which means the testing of advanced therapies that is happening in the US, and we have 1/3 of the clinical trials that are happening in China. That's far, far behind. You know that China has more PhD students than Europe, right, in biotech, because they just have a bigger population in general. So what used to happen in China was more copying. What's happening now is innovating. And they have these extensive trials, 3 times more trials in China than here. What does that mean? That means that advanced therapies is very local. It's those therapies where I take your cells, I transform the genetic makeup, and I give them back to you. It happens locally. The science has to happen locally. I cannot import that from another part of the world. So we will be behind in terms of creating, in terms of investing, but we will be behind in terms of finding solutions for our patients. And it's not something that you can just translate over, especially in this geopolitical reality in which we find ourselves. If you remember COVID, we were the first and only region that gave out, as soon as we gave our own European community vaccines, we also exported them. If we have to wait for other parts of the world to export to us next time there's a pandemic, we'll be waiting for months with no certainty. So I think this idea of resilience is also just a question of meeting the needs of our population. It's not only resilience, it's a question of respecting the right to health of Europeans as well as of other parts of the world, of course.
Super, thank you so much. Now I want to discuss issues of AI with Hema and Ajit now, but hopefully making a link to health, because of course AI in health is of enormous and growing importance. Also safe AI, and I'm thinking here about an approach which the EU has developed to establish testing and experimentation facilities for AI solutions in healthcare. So that is, to me, an example of how you can de-risk the application of AI in this very field. But Hema, you are a leading voice in in technology ethics. And what I would like to ask you about is how do you see the growth of this new sector of the economy that is based on making AI safe and trustworthy?
I think that's the only future for AI, really. I don't think that we can safely develop new technologies unless we tackle the issue of ethics, trustworthiness, and impact on society, basically. So for the last, I think it's 7 years already, we've been working on how to audit AI systems, to understand how they work and to understand their impact on society. And what we are realizing is that when we open the black box of AI, when we open an AI system to inspect it, to look for ethics and impact issues, what we find are systems that are not working well. And you wanted us to make a link to health, and it's actually quite similar. It's like the AI that's around us right now, it's like medicine that didn't go through clinical trials. And that means that it's not safe for the population, but it also means that it's really bad quality because we have not created the ways to inspect those systems and ensure that when they hit society, they do it in ways that are responsible, accountable, and safe for everyone to use. I don't think that people during the pandemic would have accepted vaccines that didn't go through clinical trials. So our vision is how can we develop the mechanisms that ensure that before technology hits the market, we understand those social impacts. We understand the ethical ramifications of AI. Because let's not forget, the fuel of AI is personal data. The only way that AI can do what it does right now, ChatGPT, recommender systems, is through massively gathering information on all of us. And our personal data, it's not just our name and our address, it's information about how we work, how we love, who we are in contact with, how we talk, how we look. It's all this information that is feeding all these systems. So unless we create mechanisms to ensure that ethics and impact are at the heart of those systems, we will have, and I repeat again, the equivalent of medicine that didn't go through clinical trials. And that's exactly what we see right now when we look out. What we see are systems that are not doing what they're supposed to do. We see systems used in hiring that are not hiring the best people for a job, that are using really useless indicators to identify potential good candidates. There was an audit in the U.S. that found out how an AI system used for hiring was prioritizing people that played lacrosse. Lacrosse is a sport played in the US by very affluent males. And basically because the training data used for that hiring system had a lot of people that had been hired in the past that played lacrosse, the AI system understood that playing lacrosse was a good thing for future recruits. That's not only discriminatory, but also a bad decision in hiring. We see the same when we look at AI systems developed in health. We see how Black people, Afro-American people, receive less care because in the past they've received less care. And because these AI systems are trained on data from the past and no one seems to care about how do we minimize or mitigate the impact of past negative dynamics in AI systems, no one's addressing this problem.
Thank you so much. And you yourself, you have conceived these algorithmic audit frameworks. And I would be interested if you could tell us a little bit more about who is it aimed at and what the take-up has been. And is this a solution that also can be and should be scaled?
Definitely. So I think that auditing is like, again, the clinical trials or the seatbelts of AI. Auditing allows us to inspect a system, and we inspect it throughout its life cycle. And so we inspect what's happening in pre-processing. That's very important. Most of the issues and the problems that then we see in processing and post-processing come from mistakes or errors or oversight that happened in pre-processing. So we inspect key moments during pre-processing where things can go wrong, and also in processing, and also in the context of Europe, where we have the human in the loop. Post-processing is also very important. So we have mapped 15 what we call sources of bias in any AI system, and we inspect for all of these. And what we do is we establish thresholds of what is acceptable. So there's a lot of people saying AI should not discriminate, but what does that mean? How much discrimination is acceptable? Is any discrimination acceptable at all? So that's what we are building. We are building the thresholds to establish, is being representative of society enough? Is being representative as your training data enough? In your specific domain, what are the thresholds that you need to bear in mind when you are developing these systems to ensure that their impact on society is a positive impact, and so that we are not carrying on with the discriminations of the past, but also that we are making good decisions. That the decisions that we're making using AI are decisions that we can stand behind. And so now I'm presiding the International Association of Algorithmic Auditors, so it's not just Ethicus. Luckily, 7 years ago, it was just us. But today, there's a lot of people in the world doing audits and understanding that the only way to build better AI, not just only safer AI, but also better AI, is ensuring that we have those mechanisms like clinical trials that ensure that anything that gets to the population is safe and trustworthy and explainable. And I think that there's no other way. And of course, other things are going to have to come up. We're going to need probably labels. We're going to need lots of different ways of guaranteeing and overseeing how AI works. But auditing is probably the first step in changing the structure of incentives in the AI industry, because up until now, the industry has not had the incentives to do things better. I always use the same example, and I have many more, but as a woman, when I go to a bank in Europe or in the US, studies show that I get between 10 and 20 times less services, banking services, than men, because women are underrepresented in training data. So the current incentives of the AI industry have not made them look at that. The current incentives are not making the AI industry look at how women or older people or people with disabilities or people with a neurodivergence or people with a different skin tone on how those systems impact on us. So if the industry did not create those incentives, we need to create them additionally. And I think that auditing is the thing that can create, is the mechanism that can create those incentives and make sure that whenever an AI system impacts on society, we are treated fairly. That when I go to the bank, I'm treated as a human being and not have to bear the weight of long-term discrimination, which translates into data and then translates into the decisions that are made about me and my future choices. Will I get a mortgage? Will I be able to buy a house? Will I be able to get a credit card? All those things are being decided by AI systems that right now are discriminatory. And I'm saying this in the banking sector, but we see this in education. AI systems designed to decide who enters a specific university. In AI systems that are deciding on medical options, we had a system in the US that was audited already 3 years ago that discovered that people were being selected in the emergency room, were being prioritized based on the cost of their disease and not on the medical urgency of the disease, because the system had been trained on financial data and not medical data. Unless we have a mechanism to look into that, to ensure that when we go to the emergency room, we can be confident that we are going to be judged based on our medical condition and not the cost of our medical condition. Until we have that, I don't think people will be able to trust AI. And I don't think that we as a society will be able to make the most of AI. I think that unless we do AI better, we will not be able to make the most of AI and of the social advance and socio-technical advance that has happened in the last few decades. I think that the future of AI is responsible AI and audited AI.
Thank you so much, Gemma. So I want to ask you one more question about where do these matters belong, sort of systemically, and this is really drawn on an experience from a few days ago when I was in a discussion with a startup founder, and she said that these questions, which you are referring to about bias, about agency, about integrity, that these questions are not asked by anybody at this stage, meaning in her journey. So they are not being asked by the funders, the investors. They make their judgment on different bases, and they are not being asked by the FDA, by the regulators. So where do you think that set of questions belong, bearing in mind that we also don't want to slow down innovation, needless to say. So how do we integrate this in a systemic way to make this work efficiently?
Well, luckily the work has already started. The DSA, the Digital Services Act, mentions explicitly the auditing of large platforms. In the AI Act that's going to be approved later this year, hopefully, there's also going to be a mention of auditing for generative AI and high-risk systems. In the US, the NTIA, NIST, the different organizations, even the White House, working on AI regulation are also incorporating thresholds and auditing as one of the potential solutions. The White House, and I'm based in the US, so I'm part of those conversations, is considering incorporating auditing as one of the requirements for the public sector to incorporate AI. So I think we're already seeing the Chinese regulation includes auditing of generative models. So I think that what we are seeing is that across the board, everyone is seeing that auditing is one of the ways in which we could begin to incorporate these responsibilities, trustworthiness in very specific ways. And like whoever goes through the AI field right now and says no one's asking me about trustworthiness or safety, then I think you're going to be kicked out of the race. I think that the race from now on It's going to be about better AI. And that means audited AI, that means more transparent AI, that means trustworthy AI, accountable AI. The same that we would not, again, consider during the pandemic. People were dying by the thousands, the millions. No one thought of releasing vaccines without going through a clinical trial. And we realized that people would die while we did the clinical trials, but no one thought, let's not do them. We understood that the only vaccines worth having were the vaccines that had gone through clinical trials. I think that we need the same change of mind. And let me link this to the theme of the conference today, the EU race. I'm European. I'm originally Spanish, but I'm dialing in today from New York because 2 years ago, we decided to move operations to the US. Because what we found is that while Europe has led the way in terms of regulation and building this concern, a global concern around personal data and the impacts of AI, where the movement is happening, where the industry is taking note, is in the US. So what we found is that in Europe, there's no incentives for companies, for a market of responsible AI to emerge. Whereas in the US, things are moving really, really quickly. And so right now we are incorporated in Delaware. Of course, we continue to have a subsidiary in Europe, and we hope to continue to make change in Europe. But I think it's quite relevant that Europe has been able to create a new sector, but has been unable to walk the path that it's created. And so in the end, we have a Europe that is very forward-coming when it comes to regulation and to being kind of the conscience of the world. But that conscience needs to translate into specific things. What is the industry that we want to promote? And unfortunately, what we see, and we've studied this before moving to the US, is that when we look at where the funding is going in Europe, none of it is going to responsible AI. None of it is going to better AI, trustworthy AI. Trustworthiness and responsibility and accountability are words in the political discourse. But when it comes to where is the money going, none of it is going to this new market that needs to emerge. In the US, of course, there's a lot of funding going into traditional AI and AI that doesn't care about anything, but there's an increasing amount of funding. And let me underline this again, incentives. When the White House is saying we are considering that to issue an executive order that says that when the public sector buys AI, it needs to be audited AI, that is creating incentives for a new market to emerge. I think that the next step for Europe is to start doing this, start believing its own words and turning those words into specific action. Where do we put the funding? Where do we put the incentives to ensure the responsible AI market emerges?
Super, thank you so much, Hema. This is very interesting because, of course, the hope and expectation had been that with this massive focus on regulating AI, we would see the emergence of companies that take ethical norms to heart. And you are saying it's not quite what is happening. Now, Ajit, you are both active in the funding context, and I would like to come back to that momentarily. But let me start with the work you are doing on the Foresight report for the European Internet Foundation, which is about the challenges ahead for Europe in the context of 2040. And if I understand correctly, you have identified geopolitics and education as the two areas which need to be prioritized in the short to medium term. So let me ask you that, and then I have a burning question about funding, drawing on what Hema just said, but let's come to it in a second. Ajit.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And I guess the important thing to emphasize and what I'm trying to say here is that we are looking at 2040, correct? So 2040 is a relatively longer time frame to look into that. And when we looked about geopolitics and conflicts and so on and so forth, while we see them today, the question is how would those cycles pan out, because that is what's going to happen. I mean, you will not see a constant state of conflict. You will see something else which will emerge after a consensus is reached. And some people say that's the emergence of the global south, or however you look at it. But what it means is that you're going to see some changes. So the way we looked at it was to look at how societies would evolve in terms of adopting AI. So you could think about it like AI advanced democracies, AI controlled authoritarian figures, AI resistant communities, AI-dependent countries, which are still in the developing stage. You could look at a hybrid of those, and then you could look at liberal democracies that still adopt some level of standardization. So in that sense, it's a very nuanced question, correct? Because it isn't about the warfare, the geopolitics, and so on and so forth. It's about alliances which could emerge as democracy and authoritarianism swing on a spectrum, and things which go on in the middle of it. Now, that has some deep implications. And for example, I talked about standardization as one of the metrics. So, for example, if you look at the mobile industry about 20 years ago, there was this sort of hypothetical use case which said that walk down the street, I get an SMS message saying you're close to Starbucks, you get a coupon off for 5% and stuff like that. Now that was a marketeer's dream, and 20 years later I walk down the high street, I get no such messages, and with good reason. I mean, not that I want them, but the point is that these sort of models require a very high amount of interoperability to work, and which is a good thing, because I look at all the sort of the negativity and the doom and gloom being talked about, the sort of the sort of the minority report scenario in AI, but for that to work, you have to have genuine connectivity out of everything, and you're likely to find that in an extremely authoritarian society, but you're not likely to find that in a democracy, or a more liberal society. And that itself is the antidote to some of those things. So that's the bit about geopolitics, because geopolitics is going to exist, but what would it look like when it comes to a sort of a state which is relatively stable? That was the question, and that's how I look at it. The second bit is education. Education is critical, not because of sort of where I come from, with Oxford and so on and so forth. I think education, the nature of education has changed. And the fact that it's going to be lifelong education, is going to be AI assisted education, is going to be education which is going to talk about solving real problems, and not necessarily knowing all the solutions, but rather trying to understand how you solve those problems. And we have been looking at a number of areas within Oxford and outside as well to look at how those things work. So, for example, if you think at Bloom's taxonomy, which is a way to learn a concept, we're trying to look at how you could flip that, how you could look at inverse Bloom's taxonomy, how you could look at innovation or creativity as a starting point of learning, and how that would then pan out in terms of acquiring new skills. And that would acquire learning to code, industrial skills in the metaverse, things like that. So that's what I mean by radically rethinking all those ideas. Hope that helps you.
Thank you very much. Now, coming back to funding, before I open up for questions from the floor, so please get those ready. And the need for more attention to what Europe funds was underlined by Hema a few minutes ago. And we actually have a recent proposal on an AI moonshot coming from two organizations, from CLARE, which is a confederation of European AI laboratories, and EU Robotics, so the EU Robotics platform. And, well, they call, just like the title says, for a moonshot approach, meaning 100 billion, I think the figure is. So the creation of a CERN for AI, given that, well, the EU has ample experience in creating funding platforms that work very well. And one is needed in the field of AI, because currently there is a fragmentation of funding. So I'm curious, Ajit, what you think of this specific idea. I think the solution that the authors call for is also a hub-like setup that would organize the collaboration of this particular community. So do we need an AI moonshot in Europe?
Sure. I'll answer this in two perspectives. And before I say that, I like to say that I'm answering it on a personal perspective. So I'm not representing EIF in this answer, nor am I representing Oxford in this answer. The first thing about CERN, or CERN-like entity, I think what is interesting is if I translate that into AI, what does that mean? So once I attended a very interesting, an organization. I won't name the country or the organization, and they talked to me about how wonderful their AI system was, and they took me onto this very large shop floor like thing, and all it had were racks of GPUs, and this represented AI to them. To me, that I think is I have never physically seen so many GPUs for one thing. The problem there is that the physical infrastructure means almost nothing in terms of AI. You can easily get them to the cloud. I don't really need to see have all these physical things in that. So the question is, what does this idea of a CERN mean? If it means something physical, which brings in all this computing power, maybe it is useful, but I think it is more useful to support intellectual efforts. I would think that what rather than that the model should be DARPA, in my opinion. DARPA is a much better moonshot option, correct? It's much better way of saying that if you come up with radical ideas, it tries to fund it so that you get some serious knock on effects in the future. So I would actually support the idea of the moonshot, but not in a centralized structure, as in something which looks like a sun, because what I then see is racks of GPUs, which I have never seen in my life before. Like I said before, I went to this organization, and I could easily get them to the Azure cloud, or Google cloud, or AWS cloud, and I don't really need them physically. So this is my first point. The second point about funding is, I think, again, I represent myself here. It's very important. When I look at something like the AI Act and all these things, they are trying to regulate something which is fundamentally not, I believe, should be regulated. So, if you look at the words of Andrew Ng, who is very well respected in the industry, he said that today's supercomputers are tomorrow's pocket watches. So, what I'm trying to say is that, and what Andrew Ng was trying to say, is that trying to regulate the model itself is not such a bright idea. And what is exactly the problem is that today's supercomputers could be tomorrow's pocket watches, and trying to regulate the number of parameters or the compute or the size of the model is a very, very technologically backward idea. And this is why I said that I'm saying it personally as a personal person, as opposed to representing an organization. The second point is that if you see the successes, I think before this talk, somebody mentioned Mistral, the French company Mistral. Aleph from Germany also, I think, is a very well-known company. I think these are very interesting startups, and they are, to a large extent, um, European. Well, they are European, and they are looking at European values. But I would say that they would be disadvantaged if you start to take the L out of the LLM. Correct? If you take the large out of large language models, you have a very different thing. You actually go back years or decades, in my opinion. So I think that when we talk about funding or startups and so on and so forth, I think we have a very sort of a. I am also an entrepreneur, and like the previous, I think, Gemma, I also moved to the US effectively. So we have a startup which we moved into to America, not in the UK and not in EU. UK post Brexit was perhaps not, I didn't want that, so I wanted either EU or the US, and we chose the US. And I think that probably for the same reasons, we saw something much bigger out there, and we saw a far more sort of a opportunistic way of people to try and do something and try something new. And this is why I come back that the model for a moonshot should be DARPA. And it shouldn't be CERN, because CERN is great, but I don't see the equivalent of that for AI. I don't see the equivalent of Hadron Collider for AI, unless you're talking about GPUs, which I don't see as a viable option, because you can get them to the cloud.
Super. Thank you so much, Ajit. I think to the credit of the authors, they used the CERN metaphor not in the literal meaning of the word, but more to demonstrate that a certain ambition is needed and scale. Now we have 5 minutes for questions, and I can see already one hand going up. 2 hands, please. Maybe we can put these questions together.
Hello, thank you, everyone. Karimas, I'm working for Catalonia. A question more for Nathalie, I believe. Can you elaborate on the, from a foresight point of view, what Europe really stands to lose if, when it comes to advanced therapies, investment goes outside? If today, and this is a wink to the World Diabetes Day, semaglutide, commercialized by Novo Nordisk as Ozempic, is not available, well, it means that diabetic people throughout the world don't have access to it. But what will it mean when it comes to advanced therapies, not having these locally? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Nathalie, as you are thinking about the answer, could we have the second question?
Hello, Sheila Rodness from Ohio State University. In the United States, we have a dreadful problem with misinformation. And I wonder what you think the role of artificial intelligence could play in ameliorating that problem, perhaps globally and on the web as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm looking around if there are any further burning questions. If not, Nathalie, yes, there's the last question here in the first row.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Simonetta Cook. I work for Charles Michel's cabinet. I have a question in particular for Gemma. Just anecdotally, I was trying to explain ChatGPT to my elderly mother a few days ago. And I said, well, look, it's really easy. Just type in some sort of question. I say, well, I was going to an event, and I said, well, if I'm going to this sort of event, what should I wear? And ChatGPT said to me I should wear a nice, clean suit, a well-ironed shirt. I should ensure my beard was well trimmed, and I should shine my shoes and make sure that my shoes matched my belt or something. And suddenly it dawned on me, as I was trying to sell to her the benefits of something like ChatGPT, I was the one that fell flat on my face, suddenly seeing the extent to which there was discrimination at such a basic level, because I think we're still very much in that sort of first generation style of AI. And perhaps it's more an expression of my concern than a question itself. But what should we be doing to resolve this? What should our priority action be here? Because I do fear, I don't want to play too much the gender card, but I find that already in the real world, there is a real gender issue. And I'm only concerned that it will be actually magnified even further in AI systems, where we might not even be able to pinpoint where the mistake, you can point to somebody and say, well, he's an old chauvinist, but you can't really do that in AI systems quite as easily. So, Gemma, if you can help with this dilemma, it'd be great.
Okay, wonderful. So 3 very important questions. We have 2 minutes left. I just want to warn the speakers. So Nathalie, if you could address the first one.
I'm really happy I don't have to address the AI questions. So advanced therapies, what happens with those? I think the difference with advanced therapies compared to the therapies that we've had until today is that those go down to the genetic level, right? So it's not only trying to fix, if you like, a genetic problem, it's also diagnostics and personalizing those medicines. So making sure that you give the right medicine to the right patient at the right moment, which avoids wastage, but also avoids a lot of other things for the patient, he or herself. And the thing with science is that it completely grows on itself. So the mRNA COVID vaccine came from mRNA research in cancer. So if you don't have that research in Europe, you don't have what that research spawns in Europe either. And we have such an incredible amount of academics and scientists. And something that was being said before, the incentives need to be such that because we have between 5 and 10 times less than the US in terms of money, and we will always have, this is the last 30 years I've been working, it's always been like that, you have to make the incentives to do research and develop and stay in Europe and manufacture in Europe so attractive that despite the lack of capital, you'll still choose Europe, you'll still choose to respond to European patients. And that's the concern. For an industry that right now is the biggest contributor to the positive trade balance of the EU, I hope we can make the revision work for us all.
Thank you so much. Now, Hema and Ajit, very briefly about the ChatGPT bias question and misinformation.
Sure. Can I go first?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll just briefly answer quickly that I think that the bias question and the ChatGPT question were both interesting, but I believe that we are just, and I think the presenter was right to say that we are at a nascent stage. I believe that the AI agents, autonomous AI agents, which is pretty much where the AI world is going, I think will take the personalization into account and will alleviate or mitigate, at least to a certain extent, many of those challenges with that. So that's my thought on that.
Super. Now, Hema.
Yeah, on the issue of misinformation, the question was, can we use AI to alleviate the problem? Unfortunately, we can't. We live in societies right now, especially in the West, or what I know, where people are happy to lie and are happy to find technologies that help them lie. That's a social problem. Technology can help us understand it, but I'm afraid we cannot outsource the need for social answers to technology. We still need to think about this in terms of social dynamics and try to work, make a concerted effort to make sure that our societies are not happy with lying or with spreading lies. And on ChatGPT, I think we need to understand how AI works. AI takes data, captures that data, finds patterns, and comes up with something that reflects the main pattern. So AI always pushes out outliers. And outliers is anyone who is not a white, middle-aged man. So anyone in the audience right now, or in the world, or among your acquaintances, who is not a white, middle-aged man, is being treated unfairly by AI systems. That is the rule that we find whenever we audit systems. So that's what we find also in ChatGPT, because no one took the time or the care to ensure that those dynamics were addressed before the system was launched. And that is the problem. We know that AI will always favor the majority, will always push out outliers. We can solve this. We can intervene upstream to mitigate that, but no one's doing it because they don't have the incentives to.
Super. Thank you very much. Let me conclude in one sentence. Next EU term will have technology at the heart of it. There's, I think, no question about it, judging on our discussion. And opportunities abound, including in ethical AI. If there was one answer that I heard over and over again, it is scaling. It is taking things to scale and investing as much as is needed in this area, because it is a battle of the giants, this technology race. Thank you so much to all the speakers, both Natalie here and Hema and Ajit online. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you, Pavel, for having moderated 2 sessions. Now, this was, I think we continue navigating tomorrow. We'll speak in our next session about socioeconomic challenges of the green transition in the face of global climate trends. And we're on stage, we will have, first online, we'll have Yamit Danyet, Director of Climate Justice Open Society Foundation in Washington. She will join us online. And on stage, we will have Valérie Trouet, who is the Scientific Director of the Belgian Climate Center. Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, who is the EU Program Director at the Institute for Climate Economics, and very happy to have you here. And the moderation will be done by Heather Grabe, who is Senior Fellow at Bruegel and is a visiting professor at the University College of London and Senior Advisor to the Open Society Foundation. So please join me on the stage, and we'll continue with this session. Thank you.